In 1798, Thomas Robert Malthus, an English economist, argued in an essay on the principle of population that we found pleasure and happiness in our natural propensity to reproduce, and that inevitably we would reach a point where our population growth outstripped growth in our food supply, leading to a cap on the human population that would take the form of subsistence living. Swings between surpluses and shortages, driven by our desire to break the ceiling of population control that is, our ability to feed new people. These swings would be marked by what we understand today to be akin to stagflation, high commodity prices paired with high unemployment rates due to an unsustainable increase in the population, decreasing the food available per person. And just like the stagflation phase is followed by a recovery phase in the contemporary Phillips curve, Malthus predicted that the economy would recover after the poorest die and the insecurity that prevented households from forming and having children abates. As security returns, people would start forming households and having children again, starting the cycle all over. Diminished marginal returns explains part of why this Malthusian trap made sense, at least at one point. Because land is a fixed factor of production, you can't easily create or destroy land in the economy, especially not in 1798. Adding more laborers to till the land won't work in the long run. Each additional laborer adds less to the output, less food, than the last laborer before them. Graphically, this is shown as the population growing exponentially on one line, with another line showing food production growing linearly and not as rapidly as population growth. Where both lines meet is where the Malthusian trap occurs, where population growth can't rise further because it would exceed what is sustainable from the food supply. Clearly, starvation has not become the main check on population growth in the US or globally. Actually, more people die every year from diseases related to a lifestyle of abundant food. So was Malthus wrong? And if so, why? Well, first, as discussed in the video before this, it turns out that as economies grow and develop, birth rates decrease, at least in the long run. Population growth rates have decreased in nations since the 1960s, regardless of World Bank income class. So the presumption that the global population would exponentially grow is flawed. What about land? Isn't it a fixed factor of production? Well, yes, but Malthus presumed in the late 1700s that land was being used as efficiently as possible. Even today, that isn't the case. For example, take the US, which uses around 40% of its contiguous land mass to feed livestock. That's really inefficient because of the disproportionate amount of resources it takes to feed livestock per calorie of food or measure of nutrient generated. For example, most of the protein yield from growing crops for poultry is lost between feeding the chickens and turning them into edible items, according to one study. And most livestock require multiples times more water per calorie of food yielded compared to plants. It's hard to argue that it wouldn't be more efficient to use that 40% of land to grow crops for direct human consumption. Actually, at least one study suggests the US could feed its population twice over if everyone shifted to a plant-based diet. Some experts now argue that famine is largely a man-made phenomenon. We seem to have more than enough food and land to feed everyone. With this kind of data, it's hard to believe that Malthus's predictions took into consideration the most efficient way to use the land for human sustenance. After all, for that to be the case, Malthus would have had to take into consideration our technological advancements, the kinds that have created productivity-enhancing capital like automated tractors, for example. In some ways, though, that technology has been a double-edged sword. More of the calories consumed in the world today, compared to the 1700s, come from ultra-processed foods. And for Americans, those foods usually make up 60% of calories consumed. They're also associated with ailments prominent in the developed world, like cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. But even outside of the developed world, processed foods are making up an ever-growing portion of people's diets, sometimes replacing necessities like water, and in other cases, helping to close the calorie gap. The percentage of the world that could be considered undernourished has been cut in half since the 1970s. Meanwhile, obesity rates are trending upward across most of the globe. This is likely in part due to the amount of ultra-processed and high-fat foods making up diets internationally, including animal products. One might be inclined to argue that although Malthus was off the mark on population-driven starvation being the trap, we've almost switched the Malthus trap for a progress trap. Think about it. Technological innovations have allowed most nations to continue to inefficiently use agricultural land while sustaining markets for their outputs. Even in agriculture's overarching inefficiency, technology has allowed us to raise and slaughter more livestock per square foot than ever before, meeting a demand for meat that grows in parallel with economic growth. The trade off, though, for containing and processing livestock in such densities has been the rise of frequent and deadly zoonotic diseases stemming from viral outbreaks among tightly packed animals that mutate and jump to humans. We try to mitigate disease among these animals by using antibiotics prophylactically, posing the risk to ourselves that the next bacterial outbreak will already be resistant to our best medicines. Technology has also allowed for food-like products to be manufactured for sale to those who can't afford unprocessed diets in the currently inefficient farming economy. The trade-off here is higher all-cause mortality and higher incidences of lifestyle diseases like obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer that actually do lead to market disruptions and inevitably early death among consumers. In some ways, Malthus was just wrong about the mechanism. The trap wasn't exponential population growth, but maybe the pursuit of exponential revenue growth.